Good evening, and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we're stepping into the vast and echoing halls of one of history's greatest empires. From a humble settlement of shepherds beside the Tiber River to the marble forums of Rome. From legions, marching across continents to emperors cloaked in power and mystery. This is the story of the Roman Empire. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you? Whether you're lying in the dark, eyes heavy with sleep, or quietly escaping into the past, this moment is yours. Breathe deeply, settle in. Let your mind drift gently across time. This is a story over 2,000 years in the making. And tonight, it's all yours. Let's begin. It begins in the shadow of the Palatine Hill, where mist still clings softly to the earth, in the early light of a world not yet formed into empire. The Tiber River murmurs through the lowlands, its slow current winding peacefully around the floodplains that will one day bear the weight of marble forums, towering columns, and the steady footfall of centurions. But now, in this quiet prelude to history, there are only soft reeds brushing gently against the banks and the slow, peaceful breathing of wilderness. Before Rome could rise, there was a story. A legend told and retold until it rooted itself so deeply into the soil of Italy that even the most skeptical voices could not pull it free. This legend speaks of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, grandsons of a king, cast out at birth and left to the mercy of the river. But the river was kind. It carried their small basket to the shore, where they were found not by a human, but by a she-wolf, the lupa. She nursed them, protected them, and in this strange, wild cradle, the future founders of Rome survived. Imagine these two boys growing up, strong and wild, with the blood of gods and kings in their veins, yet raised by a wolf. They learned the language of the forest before they learned the language of men. This mix of divine heritage and untamed nature would become the very spirit of Rome itself. Ambitious, fierce, and utterly unique. As they grew into men, they learned of their true lineage and returned to reclaim their birthright. Victorious, they decided to found a city of their own on the very hills where they were saved. But here, the story takes a dark turn. The brothers quarreled over where to build the city walls. Romulus chose the Palatine Hill, Remus, the Avene. To settle the dispute, they looked to the gods for a sign, an augury based on the flight of birds. Remus saw 6 vultures first, but then Romulus saw 12. Who had the gods favored? The one who saw the sign first, or the one who saw the greater number? The argument escalated. In a fit of rage and defiance, Remus leaped over the shallow trench Romulus had dug to mark his new city's walls. For this act of disrespect, Romulus struck his brother down. Rome was founded in an act of fratricide, a dark omen staining its very foundations. With his brother gone, Romulus named the city after himself, Roma. From this brutal, legendary beginning, a small village of huts began to take shape on the Palatine Hill. It was a rough place, a haven for outcasts, runaways, and ambitious men drawn by the promise of a new start. To populate his city, Romulus famously orchestrated the abduction of women from the neighboring Sabine tribe, an event that led to war. But eventually, a union between the two peoples. This early history, a blend of myth and harsh reality, shows us the core of Roman character, a relentless drive to survive, to expand, and to absorb others into its growing power. It wasn't built on ideals of peace, but on pragmatism, strength, and an unshakable belief in its own destiny. These early kings laid the groundwork. They established the Senate, an advisory council of elders that would one day become the most powerful political body in the ancient world. They built the first temples, the first public works, and established the religious customs that would bind the people together. Tessitiri, street by street, alliance by alliance, but the rule of kings was not to last. The Romans, even in these early days, had a deep-seated suspicion of absolute power held by one man. The reign of the 7th and final king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, was marked by tyranny and cruelty. His son's unforgivable crime against a noble woman named Lucretia was the final spark that ignited the fires of rebellion. Lucretia's tragedy became a rallying cry for freedom. Led by Lucius Junius Brutus, the people of Rome rose up, overthrew the monarchy, and swore an oath never again to be ruled by a king. In the year 509 BC, the Roman Republic was born. This was a pivotal moment. The power no longer rested in the hands of a single, hereditary ruler, but with the citizens themselves. Represented by elected officials, this new form of government would unleash the ambition and energy of the Roman people, setting them on a path of conquest that would eventually lead them to master the known world. The Age of Kings was over. The Age of the Republic had begun. This is the story of the Roman Empire. As always, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you? Whether you're lying in the dark, eyes heavy with sleep, or quietly escaping into the past, this moment is yours. Breathe deeply, settle in. Let your mind drift gently across time. This is a story over 2,000 years in the making. And tonight, it's all yours. Let's begin. It begins in the shadow of the Palatine Hill, where mist still clings softly to the earth in the early light of a world not yet formed into empire. The Tiber River murmurs through the lowlands, its slow current winding peacefully around the floodplains that will one day bear the weight of marble forums, towering columns, and the steady footfall of centurions. But now, in this quiet prelude to history, there are only soft reeds brushing gently against the banks, and the slow, peaceful breathing of wilderness. Before Rome could rise, there was a story, a legend told and retold, until it rooted itself so deeply into the soil of Italy that even the most skeptical voices could not pull it free. The story speaks of twin boys born of a priestess named Rhea Silvia. She was a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity by the command of her uncle, King Amulius, who feared any challenge to his throne. But fate, it seems, cannot be avoided by decree. The god Mars, cloaked in divine silence, came to Rhea and left her with sons, Romulus and Remus. The king, upon hearing of their birth, ordered them cast into the river. The order was followed. The twins were placed in a woven basket and left to die in the muddy current of the Tiber. But the river was swollen and sluggish from spring rains, and the gentle current deposited the basket safely in the shallows. There, near the roots of an ancient fig tree, a she-wolf found them. She was not a creature of horror, as later stories would make her. She was a mother with no pups of her own. Her fur was bristled and her breath warm, and she took the boys into her den beneath the Palatine. There she nursed them, and they lived. The shepherd Faustulus later found them and brought them into his home. The twins grew among flocks and fields, unaware of the bloodlines that coiled through their veins. They were bold and stubborn and unafraid of struggle. As young men, they learned the truth of their lineage and helped their grandfather reclaim his rightful throne in Alba Longa. They might have stayed, but they didn't. Something pulled them back to the wilderness near the river. That stretch of land near the 7 hills called to them, and they answered with ambition. They decided to build a new city. But even in the beginning, Rome was forged in conflict. The twins could not agree on where to lay the first stone, or who would lead. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill. Remus preferred the Aventine. They consulted omens. Romulus saw more birds. Remus claimed he saw them first. The argument ended with blood in the dirt. Remus was killed, whether by Romulus himself or by one of his men. The stories differ, but the result was the same. One brother lived. One brother ruled. The survivor drew a line in the earth, marked the limits of his walls, and began to build. No one could cross the sacred boundary without consequence, he declared. The message was clear. The city would be defended, even if that meant the loss of kin. The date given by tradition was April 21st, 753 years before the birth of Christ. That year was remembered not because of the stones or the borders, but because of the will behind them. Romulus named the city after himself and became its first king. Around him, the new city grew in rough circles, simple huts, wooden palisades, and early temples to unknown gods. The story had the city that Romulus founded did not remain a solitary dream for long. Men from nearby tribes were drawn to the place, but with few women among them, Rome's future was uncertain. So, Romulus orchestrated the infamous abduction of the Sabine women. During a great festival, Roman men seized the unmarried daughters of the neighboring Sabines. The act was brutal, but it stitched the peoples together. The Sabine men eventually reconciled, and the city expanded once more. In the decades that followed, Romulus continued to rule. But legends say his end was as mysterious as his beginning. One day, during a storm, he vanished, taken up into the sky. His followers believed he had become a god. Whether that was true or not, his city remained. Rome was born in violence, shaped by ambition, and claimed by what some called divine favor. It would not be the last time that myth and reality blurred, or that the boundaries of empire would be drawn with a sword. After Romulus's strange disappearance, Rome was left with a throne. It would not yet be a republic or an empire. For more than 200 years, it would be ruled by kings. According to tradition, 7 kings ruled in sequence, their names etched into the foundation stones of legend. The second king, Numa Pompilius, was a Sabine, known for being wise and deeply pious. While Romulus had built walls and forged weapons, Numa built temples and organized time. He shaped the early calendar, created priestly offices, and taught the people the rituals of peace. The city became more than a military outpost. It became a place of rhythm and tradition. Other kings followed, each leaving marks that would endure. The third king, Tujus Hostilius, rejected peace and gloried in conquest. He destroyed the rival city of Alba Longa and brought its nobles to Rome, expanding the Senate. The fourth, Ancus Marcius, built bridges across the Tiber and extended Roman influence to the sea. Rome was no longer a village. It was becoming a city of roads and rituals, warriors and artisans, bound together by shared ambition. The monarchy had power, but it was not absolute. A council of elders, the Senate, advised the king, and the people participated in assemblies, even if their voices were small. Then, Rome began to change even more rapidly. The last 3 kings were of Etruscan origin. From the lands to the north, they brought new ideas in engineering, religion, and symbolism. Under King Tarquinius Priscus, the great racetrack, the Circus Maximus, was begun. His successor, Servius Tullius, was said to have been born a slave, rising to power through merit. He divided the city into districts, started census records, and reorganized the military into centuries. His rule was long and filled with reform, but it ended in blood. He was murdered by his own son-in-law, a man who would become the last king of Rome. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, remembered forever as Tarquin the Proud, took the throne not by consent, but by force. He ruled with cruelty and suspicion, abolishing the rights his predecessors had protected and ignoring the Senate. His projects were ambitious, like the massive Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, but his methods were ruthless. The people of Rome were growing tired of kings, and this last one, with his arrogance and tyranny, was pushing them to the brink. A storm was gathering over the city, not of lightning and thunder, but of revolution. The Age of Kings was coming to a violent end, and a new idea was about to be born: the Roman Republic. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into Rome's past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join us for our next story. The end of the Roman monarchy wasn't brought by an invading army or a glorious battle. It was an implosion, a collapse from within. The story goes that the king's son, Sextus Tarquinius, committed a terrible act against a noble woman named Lucretia. In response to this violation, she took her own life in public, and her death became a spark that set Rome ablaze. The city's leading families, filled with outrage, were led in revolt by a man named Lucius Junius Brutus. The people rose up. The king was driven out, and his entire family was exiled. The monarchy, after centuries, was declared finished. In its place, the Romans built something new, a form of government that despised the very idea of a king. They entrusted power not to one man for life, but to magistrates elected by the citizens. This was the birth of the Republic. Its early years were fragile, and the memory of the kings lingered a mix of respect for the order they brought and a deep, abiding fear of tyranny. For centuries after, any Roman who even hinted at wanting the title of king would face universal hatred. They remembered how it ended. The Age of Kings had forged them, but it also taught them a powerful lesson about what happens when power is held too tightly. The crown was broken, and the sword was passed to the people. or so they believed. The story of Rome was just beginning, but its rhythm was already set. Glory born from violence, greatness shaped by struggle, and an undying ambition to build something that would last forever. The monarchy had fallen, and in its place rose a fragile Untest idea. Untest idea carried more by hope than by certainty. It was called a republic, a public thing, designed not to honor kings, but to replace them with men who held power only for a moment before having to give it back. Where one crown once sat, there were now 2 consuls, elected every year, each with equal authority, each a check on the other's power. The Senate, a council of Rome's elders, remained as an advisory body. Assemblies were created to give the citizens a voice, though not all voices were equal. On paper, it was an orderly system, but in reality, power is never that neat. And Rome, now a republic in name, would spend its first decades fighting over what that name truly meant. The Republic's greatest enemy in these early years was not a foreign power like Carthage or a distant army from the east. It was the bitter tension simmering within its own walls, between the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the old, noble families, the major landowners whose ancestors had advised kings. They filled the Senate and believed it was their birthright to rule. The plebeians were everyone else. The farmers, the artisans, the soldiers who bled for Rome, but were barred from holding office, and kept in the dark about the very laws that governed their lives. These laws weren't even written down. They were guarded like a secret language by the elite. So the Republic, born from a rebellion against tyranny, found itself lurching from one internal crisis to the next. The plebeians fought for recognition in a state that demanded their loyalty, but refused them equality. The first major turning point came not with a sword, but with a refusal. In 494 BCE, the plebeians simply walked out. They left the city, gathered on a nearby hill, and declared they would not return until they were granted true representation. It was an incredibly bold move. Without its workers and soldiers, Rome was the patricians had no choice but to give in. This led to the creation of a new office, the tribune of the plebs. These tribunes were declared sacrosanctum to Cibaland, were given the power to protect the common people, and even veto unjust actions by the consuls or the Senate. It was a huge victory, but it was only the first of many battles to come. The struggle continued for generations, as the plebeians demanded that the laws be written down for all to see, that justice be made visible, and that the privileges of the few be balanced by the rights of the many. This was the long, hard road to making the Republic truly a thing of the people. Rome's first laws weren't gifted by the gods or inherited from ancient kings. They were won in the streets. The plebeians, the common people, demanded to know the rules they lived by. After years of struggle, they got them the 12 tables, bronze plaques set up in the forum for all to see. No more secret laws, no more invisible chains. This was a huge victory, but power is a stubborn thing. The patrician families didn't just surrender. They adapted, giving a little here while tightening their grip elsewhere. The path to equality was long and winding, but the foundation was laid. Rome was learning that a republic isn't built on silence, but on argument, pressure, and compromise. But while Rome wrestled with itself, the world outside wasn't waiting. The Italian peninsula was a mosaic of rival tribes and proud cities. Rome fought its neighbors, the Latins, the Sabines, the Vii in a constant brutal rhythm of war. Then, in 390 BCE, came disaster. A Gallic army swept down from the north and shattered the Roman defenses. The city was sacked. The streets ran with fire and blood. The survivors had to pay a humiliating ransom in gold just to get their city back. This wasn't just a defeat. It was a wound to the soul, a shame that would burn for generations. From those ashes, a new Rome emerged. They rebuilt their walls stronger, reformed their army, and swore that such a thing would never happen again. The Republic staggered, but it did not fall. It broke and repaired itself, growing stronger with each crisis. It was a city no longer ruled by a king, but not yet fully ruled by law. It was an organism constantly changing. Its citizens argued and marched, they rebelled and they served. The legions were taking form, the government was growing more complex, and the dream of a true republic pulsed beneath every stone. Rome didn't become great because it was destined to. It became great because it fought for every inch. The hills and valleys of Italy were already home to ancient cities, mountain tribes, and Greek colonies. Rome didn't conquer this world in one swift campaign. It was a slow grinding process. A century of wars that wore down armies and forged new identities. After the shock of the Gallic sack, Rome's expansion began, not as a grand plan for empire, but as a messy series of conflicts or retaliations for raids, broken treaties, and border disputes. When the Latin League, a coalition of cities that were once Rome's equals, rose up against its growing dominance, Rome's response was crushing. It dismantled the League and built something new in its place. From now on, each city would be tied to Rome directly, not to each other. They could keep their local customs and their gods, but they had to provide soldiers and pledge loyalty. It wasn't equality, but it was inclusion. A system that turned former enemies into future assets. To the east, in the rugged mountains, lived the fierce. Rome would fight 3 long, exhausting wars against them. The Samnites were masters of guerrilla warfare, trapping Roman legions in narrow mountain pockets. In one infamous defeat, an entire Roman army was captured and forced to pass under a symbolic yoke of spears, the ultimate humiliation. The shame was a powerful motivator for Rome. It didn't break them. It made them regroup, retrain, and return with a vengeance. The Roman military became a relentless learning machine. It learned from its defeats, adopted the weapons and tactics of its enemies, and developed an unbreakable discipline. Slowly, methodically, they pushed the Samnites back. They built roads into the mountains not just for armies, but for trade, for communication, for control. These weren't just paths, they were arteries, pumping Roman influence deep into the heart of Italy. Meanwhile, in the south, the wealthy Greek cities watched Rome's rise with alarm. They hired Pyrrhus, a brilliant general and a cousin of Alexander the Great, to stop the Roman advance. Pyrrhus brought war elephants, terrifying beasts the Romans had never seen before. He won battles, but his losses were so devastating that he famously said, "One more such victory, and we are lost." He had learned a hard lesson. You could beat a Roman army, but you couldn't beat Rome. The Republic had an almost inexhaustible supply of manpower from its network of allies. Rome didn't just fight with a single army. It fought with the strength of half of Italy. In 264 BCE, after centuries of conflict, the entire Italian peninsula was under Roman control. But this wasn't an empire of subjects. It was a confederation, bound together by a complex web of treaties, citizenship rights, and military obligations. A man from a conquered city might still be a Samnite or a Latin at heart, but his sons would serve in the legions. His grandsons would speak Latin and might even dream of becoming a Roman senator. Rome didn't just conquer land. It assimilated people. It turned enemies into allies, and allies into Romans. This unique ability to absorb and integrate was the secret to its strength. The foundations of a global power had been laid, not with a single blueprint, but through countless battles, compromises, and a relentless. After generations of brutal conflict, the Samnite Wars finally ended. But the outcome was already written in stone. With each battle, Rome's armies grew more adaptable, its alliances stronger, and its famous road systems more extensive. Rome wasn't just fighting wars. It was building the very infrastructure for the next one. With the Samnites subdued, Rome turned its gaze south, toward the wealthy Greek colonies of Magna Graecia. These cities, proud of their Hellenic heritage, looked down on the Romans as unsophisticated ups. When Rome's expansion threatened the city of Tarentum, they called for a hero from across the sea. King Pyrrhus of a relative of Alexander the Great's generals. Pyrrhus arrived with war, elite phalanxes, and the swagger of a proven conqueror. He met the Romans on the battlefield and defeated them. And then he defeated them again. But his victories were devastatingly costly. Surveying the field after one such triumph, he famously remarked that one more victory like it would utterly ruin him. His campaign, brilliant as it was, collapsed under its own weight. The Romans, battered and bloodied, but never broken, remained. By the mid-3rd century BCE, no power in Italy could stand against them. The Etruscans were absorbed, The Greek cities had surrendered. Rome now ruled the peninsula, but Rome didn't just impose a single, uniform government. Instead, it created a complex patchwork of treaties, colonies, and varying levels of citizenship. Some cities became fully Roman. Others received partial rights. Many remained technically independent, but were bound to Rome by military obligation. This wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the design. It kept the Italian peoples loyal to Rome, but divided from each other, preventing any unified rebellion. With Italy secure, Rome had a massive pool of soldiers, a network of roads to move them, and legions hardened by constant warfare. The sense of destiny was beginning to burn within the Roman spirit. But just across the water, a different kind of power was waiting. Sud of Italy, the city of Carthage, ruled the waves. Its empire was one of trade, not conquest by land. Its mighty fleet patrolled the coasts of Sicily, and its merchant network stretched from Spain to North Africa. For a long time, Rome and Carthage had coexisted, each respecting the other's sphere of influence. But that peace was fragile. Lying between them was the island of Sicily, a prize of rich farmlands and strategic ports, and it was here that the fire would be lit. A small dispute over the Sicilian city of Messana drew both powers in. Carthage sent forces to restore order, and Rome, seeing a Carthaginian army just a stone's throw from Italy, knew it couldn't stand by. The Roman Senate, after much debate, made a fateful decision. They sent the legions across the strait. It was an act of caution that would plunge them into their first war outside the Italian peninsula. The First Punic War had begun. Neither side was truly ready. Carthage was the master of the sea. Rome was a land power with virtually no navy. But the Romans did what they always did. They adapted. They captured a Carthaginian warship, reverse engineered it, and built a fleet of their own. They trained sailors with brutal discipline and invented a new weapon, the corvus, a large boarding bridge that allowed their superior soldiers to turn a naval battle into a land battle on water. The wars for Italy had taught Rome how to bleed and endure. The wars for empire were about to teach them how to conquer the world. For over 2 decades, the First Punic War dragged on. Rome would win battles on land, only to lose entire fleets to violent storms at sea. Carthage, with its powerful navy, could strike from the coast but struggled to hold territory inland. Sicily, caught in the middle, became a graveyard for thousands. Ultimately, it was Rome's sheer resilience that won the day. In 241 BCE, after a decisive naval victory, Carthage sued for peace. The terms were harsh. Sicily became Rome's very first overseas province. The Republic had stepped beyond Italy, planting its flag on foreign soil. But this peace was fragile, a temporary truce built on resentment. Carthage, seeking to rebuild its strength, turned its gaze to Spain. The rich silver mines and new conquests there offered a path back to power. Rome watched, suspicious, as Carthaginian influence grew. But the spark that reignited the conflict didn't come from a Roman senator. It came from a Carthaginian general whose name would be seared into Roman history. Hannibal Barca. As a child, Hannibal had sworn an oath to his father. He would never be a friend to Rome. In 218 BCE, he made good on that promise. Leading a diverse army from Spain, Hannibal did the unthinkable. He marched his forces, including war elephants, across the Pyrenees and then over the treacherous, snow-covered Alps, descending into Italy itself. It was an audacious masterstroke of strategy. His army, though battered and reduced by the journey, was a force of pure genius. Hannibal delivered one crushing defeat after another to the Romans. At the Trebia River at Lake and then at Cannae. The Battle of Cannae was a nightmare for Rome. Hannibal executed a perfect encirclement, annihilating entire Roman legions. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed in a single, horrific day. Panic swept through Rome. Cities in southern Italy defected to Hannibal's side. It seemed the Republic was on the verge of collapse, but Rome did not break. It adapted. Under the cautious command of Fabius Maximus, they adopted a new strategy. Avoid direct battle. Instead, they shadowed Hannibal's army, harassing his supply lines and slowly bleeding him dry. For over a decade, Hannibal remained in Italy undefeated in battle, yet trapped, unable to land the final blow. While Hannibal was contained, Rome took the fight elsewhere. In Spain, a new generation of commanders emerged. One of them, a young man named Publius Cornelius Scipio, proved to be a military prodigy. He captured Carthaginian strongholds, drove their armies out of Spain, and then, in a bold move, brought the war to their home turf in North Africa. This forced Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend his own city. In 202 BCE, near the town of Zama, the two greatest generals of the age, Scipio and Hannibal, finally met on the battlefield. It was a reversal of Cannae. This time, Roman strategy triumphed. Scipio's tactics neutralized Hannibal's war elephants, turning them back into his own lines. The battle-hardened Roman legions outfought the Carthaginian infantry. Hannibal had finally been defeated. Carthage surrendered once more, and the terms were even more crippling. They lost their fleet, their overseas territories, and their independence. Scipio was celebrated as a hero and given the name of Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The Second Punic War had shaken the Republic to its very foundation, but it had also forged a new Roman identity. Victory, they learned, wasn't just about brilliant generals. It was about stubbornness, an unbreakable will to endure disaster and keep fighting. Rome hadn't just survived Hannibal. It had learned from him. The Republic that emerged from the war was transformed. It was bigger, more confident, and had developed an appetite not just for security, but for dominance. The Mediterranean Sea was beginning to look less like a collection of rival powers and more like a Roman lake. The Roman Republic was not yet an empire. Even after the Great Battle of Zama, the fire of Carthage wasn't completely out. It was a flickering candle in the wind, and Rome watched every single waver. Carthage was a shadow of its former self. He'd gone, forbidden to fight without Rome's permission, and groaning under the weight of massive payments. But it was still a city of commerce, its fields fertile, its ports busy. For an entire generation, Carthage dutifully paid its dues and caused no trouble. But here's the thing about success: it can make others nervous. Back in Rome, a powerful faction of senators felt that Carthage shouldn't be allowed to recover at all. Their loudest voice was Cato the Elder. It didn't matter what he was talking about in the Senate. He ended every single speech with the same chilling phrase: Carthage must be destroyed. In 149 BCE, Rome got its excuse. Carthage, after being provoked by a neighbor, finally fought backing. The Third Punic War began. But this wasn't really a war. It was an execution. Rome sent its army not to fight, but to obliterate. The Carthaginians, facing annihilation, resisted with incredible courage. The siege was brutal, lasting 3 long years. Families starved in the streets. Fires consumed entire districts. When the Roman soldiers finally breached the walls, they fought a horrific battle, house by house. Those who surrendered were dragged away into slavery. Those who kept fighting were cut down where they stood. The city was razed to the ground. There is a famous legend that the Romans sowed the earth with salt so that nothing would ever grow there again. While that might just be a dramatic story, the message was clear. Carthage was gone. But Carthage was only half the story. While Rome was conquering the West, the East was dominated by the Greek and Hellenistic kingdoms. Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander the Great, had once ruled an empire that stretched all the way to India. By the 2nd century BCE, Alexander's successors still held immense power, but they had also become complacent. Rome, flush with victory, now turned its ambitions eastward. It started subtly. Rome claimed it was just protecting its allies in the region, but protection quickly turned into interference, and interference eventually led to war. Over several decades, a series of Macedonian wars allowed Rome to sink its claws deeper and deeper into Greek affairs. Whenever a Greek state pushed back against Roman influence, they were met with legions. The final act came in 146 BC. The very same year, Carthage fell. The great city of Corinth, a jewel of Greek commerce and culture, rose up in revolt. Rome's response was swift and merciless. The city was sacked. Its priceless statues were looted. Its ancient temples burned. The treasures of Hellenic civilization were loaded onto Roman ships and hauled back to Italy. Greece, the civilization that had taught Rome so much about art, philosophy, and democracy, was now just another Roman province. The symbolism of that year, 146 BC, was undeniable. In the span of a few months, two of the Mediterranean's oldest and greatest powers, Carthage in the west, Greece in the east, were brought to their knees. Rome stood alone, the undisputed master of the sea. What came next wasn't a formal empire with an emperor, not yet. But it was an empire in all but name. Provinces were carved out in Spain, North Africa, Greece, and beyond. Roman governors were sent to rule them. Some were fair, but many were corrupt, enriching themselves at the expense of the locals. Unimaginable wealth poured into Rome. Gold, slaves, spices, and art from every corner of the known world. The city of Rome transformed. Marble temples and grand monuments too. Victory shot up. Senators returned from campaigns as billionaires, building lavish villas across the countryside. Triumphant generals paraded their conquests through the streets. Rome was on top of the world. But even as Rome celebrated its total victory, dangerous cracks were appearing in its foundations. The very army that had won this empire was changing. It was no longer an army of citizen farmers who fought for a season and returned to their land. Now, soldiers were serving 4 years in far-off lands, and when these veterans finally came home, many found their family farms bankrupt, sold off to the very same wealthy elites who had profited from their sacrifice. The seeds of internal conflict were being sown, and the Republic, despite its outward strength, was slowly beginning to tear itself apart from the inside. From Spain to Syria, from gold to Egypt, the shadow of the Roman eagle stretched across the known world. The Mediterranean was a Roman lake, its pirates swept away, its rival powers defeated or absorbed. Rome had conquered everything in its path, but a new, more dangerous enemy was rising. Not from beyond the frontiers, but from within. The very success that had built this empire was now threatening to tear it apart. What began as a small city of farmers and soldiers had swelled into a global power. Its administrators could no longer see its borders from any single hilltop. Victory brought unimaginable wealth, silver, grain, and slaves flowed into Italy. But this flood of riches didn't lift all boats. Instead, it carved a chasm between the haves and the have-nots. The Republic, so carefully designed to balance power, was beginning to buckle under the weight of its own conquests. The first cracks appeared in the countryside. The citizen soldiers who had fought Rome's wars returned home not to praise, but to ruin. Their small farms, left untended for years, had been swallowed up by wealthy aristocrats. These massive estates, called latifundia, were worked by armies of slaves captured in those same wars. The free farmers, the very backbone of the Republic, found themselves landless and dispossessed. With nowhere else to go, they poured into the city of Rome. A restless, angry mass of people, dependent on government handouts and the promises of ambitious politicians. The Senate, once the steady hand guiding the state, was now filled with men who profited from this new order. They saw the growing crises, but often chose to serve their own interests over the formal traditions of government continued. The assemblies voted. The magistrates served, but behind the curtain, the foundations were crumbling. The gap between rich and poor had become a fault line, and it was about to trigger an earthquake. Into this powder keg stepped two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Born into the nobility, they were driven by a radical idea that the Republic could be saved. In 133 BCE, Tiberius, as tribune of the plebs, proposed a simple, powerful solution. He wanted to reclaim public land that had been illegally hoarded by the rich and redistribute it to the poor, giving Roman citizens a stake in their own society once more. The plan was rooted in Roman law, but to the wealthy senators, it was an act of war. They saw it as a direct attack on their property and their power. When they blocked his proposal, Tiberius did something unheard of. He went around them, taking his law directly to the People's Assembly. This shattered political norms and ignited outrage among the elite. When Tiberius sought re-election to protect his reforms, his enemies saw their chance. They branded him a would-be king. On the Capitoline Hill, a mob of senators and their supporters attacked him, bludgeoning him to death. His body was unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber River. The message was brutal and clear. The old order would not be challenged. 10 years passed. The problems only grew worse. Then, Gaius Gracchus, Tiberius's younger brother, picked up the fallen torch. He was more charismatic, a better organizer, and even more ambitious. He unleashed a barrage of reforms. Not just land distribution, but subsidized grain for the poor, citizenship for Rome's Italian allies, and new laws to break the Senate's stranglehold on the courts. For a moment, it seemed like he might succeed. Huge crowds flocked to hear his speeches. His popular support was immense, but as his power grew, so did the fear and hatred of his opponents in the Senate. They saw him not as a reformer, but as a demagogue tearing down the Republic. The story of the Gracchi brothers is a turning point. It estes the moment the political violence that had been exported to the frontiers was brought home to the very heart of Rome. The Republic's civil wars had begun. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. See you next time.